Okay, let's dive straight in.
Let's do it.
Today we're really unpacking something absolutely essential if you want to sound confident, natural when you're speaking English,
Mm,
and that's expressing your opinions clearly.
that's right. I mean, think about your daily life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're just chatting with friends about, I don't know, the latest movie.
Yeah, or food or whatever.
Exactly.
What?
Or maybe you're in a discussion at work, contributing ideas, or even just posting thoughts online.
All the time.
They're constantly needing to say what you think about something.
Exactly. It feels really fundamental, doesn't it?
Totally.
But based on the insights from the material we've been exploring, this seems to be a point where quite a few English learners feel a bit stuck.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They might have the words, the grammar down pretty well.
Right.
But then someone turns to them, maybe in a meeting or just socially, and asks, so what do you make of this? Or where do you stand on that?
And to freeze.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to just kind of clam up.
Or you default to those very, very simple phrases, right? Maybe just using I think over and over again.
Oh, definitely. Or giving really brief answers that don't really help much.
Like, did you like the movie?
Yeah, it was good.
End of conversation.
Very much. Or, what do you think of this proposal? It's okay. Doesn't really move things forward.
Right. And you feel that pressure, to say something, but maybe you're just not sure how to phrase your specific viewpoint.
Hmm. Or maybe you feel like you need this perfectly formed, super elaborate idea before you can even open your mouth.
Yeah, that too. And the thing is, in many English-speaking contexts, there's often this kind of expectation, isn't there?
What's that?
That you won't just state what you think, but you'll also offer a little bit of the why.
Ah, yes. The reasoning.
Exactly. What's the logic behind your opinion? Or maybe do you have an example that shows what you mean?
Providing that support is absolutely key. It adds, substance to your opinion. It makes you sound more thoughtful, more considered,
Yeah.
and really it gives the person you're talking to something concrete to actually respond to.
It keeps the conversation going.
Precisely. So our mission today really is to equip you, the listener, with the language and maybe just as importantly, the confidence to do just that.
Okay.
We've really pulled apart the source material we looked at to find the most effective ways to state your opinion clearly, how to back it up with solid reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and also how to navigate those tricky moments when you need to agree, or perhaps more delicately, disagree.
And doing it all while sounding natural and crucially polite.
That's the goal.
Great. So let's build this step by step. First things first, let's tackle the very beginning. How do you actually start a sentence in a way that clearly signals, okay, hold on, here comes my personal view?
Yeah, this is more important than it might sound at first. It's like giving your listener a little heads up, a signpost.
A signpost, I like that.
Using specific introductory phrases, it does a few things. It helps structure your own thought process, for one.
Okay.
It clarifies that what you're saying is your perspective,
Yeah.
not necessarily some universal facts.
Right. Distinguishes it.
And honestly, just having a bit of variety in how you start makes your speech sound much more fluent and, well, sophisticated than just relying on, I think, for every single opinion.
Yeah, that can get repetitive fast. So it's about being sort of intentional with that opening phrase.
Definitely.
And the material we looked at, it gives us a really good set of these core essential phrases, not a massive list, but the ones you'll probably hear and use most often.
Exactly. They're the high-frequency ones.
Yeah.
Let's maybe break down a few of the really common and useful ones that came up.
Okay, let's hear them.
All right, first up, in my opinion,
The classic.
absolutely the classic. It's probably the most direct way to signal you're giving a personal view. Super straightforward.
And versatile.
Very versatile. It works in almost any situation, really.
Mm-hmm.
Casual chats, slightly more formal discussions. It's just crystal clear. This is what I think.
Okay, simple, direct. Got it. What's next?
How about I personally believe that?
Ah, adding the personally. What does that do?
Well, adding personally puts a little extra emphasis on the fact that this is your individual conviction, your specific belief.
So maybe if you feel strongly.
Yeah, or perhaps when you want to distinguish your view from maybe what the group thinks or the general consensus,
Okay.
it adds a touch more weight, suggests it's something you've, personally considered.
Makes sense. This is really my take.
Exactly. Then there's from my point of view.
Okay, from my point of view. How's that different?
This one suggests that your opinion is maybe shaped by your specific perspective, your angle, or perhaps your unique experience with the topic.
Ah, so it highlights where you're coming from.
Precisely. It implies you're looking at the issue through a particular lens.
Mm,
Like, the source had a good example implicitly. If you were discussing, say, a city's new transport system,
right.
you might say, from my point of view as a daily commuter, the new bus routes are a bit of a disaster.
Ugh. Okay, so as a daily commuter part, even if it's just implied by the phrase, highlights that specific user experience is informing your opinion.
Exactly. It frames it based on your vantage point.
Cool. What else?
Okay, I would say that this one's interesting.
I would say. How so?
It feels a bit softer, maybe less assertive than, in my opinion.
More cautious.
Yeah, perhaps more tentative. It can be a way to offer an opinion when you're maybe not 100% certain, or when you want to be extra polite or collaborative in a discussion.
So less like planting a flag, more like offering a thought.
That's a great way to put it. It's very commonly used, and it can make you sound a bit more thoughtful, like you're offering a considered statement rather than a firm, unshakable declaration.
Okay, I could see situations where that would be useful. Any others?
One more key one from the source, as far as I'm concerned.
As far as I'm concerned, that sounds a bit like setting limits.
It kind of does. This phrase sets a boundary on the relevance or the scope of your opinion. It indicates that your view applies particularly to the matter at hand, or maybe implies that this specific aspect is what matters most to you. So it's like saying, regarding this specific point, or what's important for me is exactly. It can sometimes carry a slight implication that, others might see things differently or focus on other aspects. But from your perspective, within your frame of concern, this is the key point.
Could you give an example?
Sure. Maybe in a project meeting discussing options. As far as I'm concerned, the most important factor here is the budget. We simply can't afford option B. It zeroes in on what you prioritize.
Got it. That clarifies the focus of your opinion. Wow, those distinctions are really helpful, actually.
Yeah, they add nuance.
It's not just picking a phrase at random. It's choosing one that subtly conveys how you're positioning your opinion.
Exactly. And the material we looked at used a really good, simple example question to illustrate this. What do you think about learning English online?
Right. So let's try applying a couple of these phrases to that question.
Okay, sounds good. So that question, what do you think about learning English online? If you use the classic, in my opinion, you could say.
Something like?
In my opinion, online learning is great because it's flexible and convenient.
Okay.
That-
Nice and neat. The phrase acts like a little header,
Hmm?
and then you immediately follow with your core opinion, it's great, and the primary reason, flexible and convenient. Very efficient.
Totally clear, totally direct. And importantly, like you said, not just it's great, but the because is right there.
Right, the reason is baked in. Okay, how about using a different opener? Maybe one that allows for a bit more complexity.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Let's try. I personally believe, you could formulate it like this, I personally believe that learning English online is effective,
Okay, so far similar.
but it also requires a lot of self-discipline.
Ah, okay. So the I personally believe introduces your core positive view. It's effective, but then you immediately add that condition, that potential drawback, the self-discipline part.
Exactly. It shows you've considered different facets of it.
Yeah.
It's not a simplistic yes or no kind of opinion. It reflects a more balanced thought process.
Yeah, that sounds much more like how someone would actually talk about a topic they've put some thought into. You're weighing the pros and cons right there in the sentence. So using these different phrases really does make your opinions sound more structured, more considered, whether you're in a, formal work setting or just kicking ideas around with a friend.
Yeah, it signals to the listener, okay, pay attention. This is my specific take on this issue.
And that clarity is just invaluable in any kind of communication, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial.
Okay, so we've kind of nailed down the opening, getting the opinion out there clearly.
Step one.
But as we mentioned right at the start, just stating what you think is often only like half the job in English conversations.
Right.
The next really crucial piece, and something that genuinely elevates your fluency and how natural you sound, is explaining why. Why do you hold that opinion?
Yes. This is where you move from just sort of delivering a verdict
Oh, yeah.
to actually providing the evidence or the rationale, the reasoning behind it.
Makes sense.
In English conversations, offering reasons makes your opinion much more persuasive, definitely more credible, and frankly, just more interesting to listen to.
Yeah, if someone just says, I think we should hire John, and then stops.
You're left hanging right, wondering, okay, why John?
Exactly. But if they add, I think we should hire John because he has the most relevant experience in managing projects like this one.
Instantly clear. Suddenly you understand the basis for their view. You see the logic.
It makes you sound much more informed, and it gives the other person something specific they can actually discuss or ask a follow-up question about, like, oh, what specific experience does he have?
Precisely. It opens up the dialogue.
Yeah.
And the sources gave us some excellent, really common phrases for linking your opinion statement to the justification that follows.
Okay, so these are the bridge phrases.
Yeah, good way to think of it. They connect your main statement to your supporting points.
Let's look at a few.
Lay them on us. Okay, first, the reason I think that is because
Very explicit.
super explicit. You're directly signposting, okay, here comes the cause, the basis for the opinion I just stated. Leaves absolutely no room for ambiguity. Very clear.
Okay, maybe a bit formal sounding, or just very clear.
Can be used in many contexts, but yes, it's very structured. A slightly more concise and common version, especially in everyday speech, is simply, that's because.
Much shorter.
Yeah, it links the statement that came immediately before to its reason. Like, I couldn't make the meeting. That's because my train was canceled. Simple, direct link.
Got it. Useful. What if you have more than one reason?
Great question. That's where one reason for this comes in really handy.
Okay.
This is super useful when your opinion isn't based on just one thing, but maybe multiple points. You introduce the first one with this phrase, and then you can follow up with things like, another reason is, or also, or in addition, or even furthermore, if you want to sound a bit more formal. It helps you structure that multi-part justification.
Okay, that's very practical for building a stronger case.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And finally, maybe the most important one for making your reasons feel real. For example.
The example.
Essential.
Absolutely essential. Abstract reasons are okay, but a concrete example, it just brings your point to life.
Right.
Makes it relatable, tangible.
Right, it shows what you mean in practice.
Exactly. It signals, okay, I'm now providing a specific instance, a case study almost, that illustrates the general point I just made.
Okay, these linking phrases are gold. Let's go back to that example from the sources to see them in action. The question was, do you think watching TV is a good way to learn English?
Right. Good test case. So instead of just a flat yes or no.
Which tells us very little.
Precisely. Let's build a more complete reasoned answer. How about using because?
You could say, yes, I think watching TV helps because you hear natural English pronunciation and expressions.
Simple enough. Because clearly introduces the benefit, hearing natural speech, which serves as your reason for thinking it's helpful.
Exactly. Hearing how native speakers actually sound, their rhythm, the common phrases they use, that's a solid reason.
Okay, clear. Now, how about using one reason, if maybe you have a couple of points?
All right. With one reason, you could structure it like this. One reason I think watching TV is useful is that it significantly improves your listening skills.
Okay, point one, listening skills.
So then you could add. And another reason is that you pick up a lot of vocabulary, especially, if you watch shows with subtitles first, maybe in your own language or in English.
Ah, I see. So one reason nicely sets up the first point, and then you can easily add more. You're building a case, laying out your evidence piece by piece.
That's the idea. Structuring your argument.
Okay, and where does, for example, fit into this TV scenario?
You could slot it in right after stating your reason to make that reason more concrete. For instance,
Go on.
yes, I think watching TV is a great way to learn English because it exposes you to diverse vocabulary and idioms. That's the reason. Now, the example. For example, watching something like a medical drama will teach you all sorts of specific terms you probably wouldn't find in a standard textbook.
True.
Or a comedy sitcom might use a lot more slang and idiomatic expressions that are really common in everyday chat.
Right. That example makes the abstract idea of diverse vocabulary much more concrete by pointing to specific types of shows and the kind of language you'd actually encounter there.
Exactly. Or you could even mention a specific show, maybe one the listener is familiar with.
Right.
For example, I remember watching the show Friends back in the day, and you hear so many common conversational fillers, and reaction phrases that native speakers use constantly without even thinking about it.
Ugh, that's much more vivid. It's not just telling someone that watching TV helps, it's showing them how and where with a specific instance. That really helps solidify the point in their mind.
Definitely. It makes the advice practical.
So, okay, combining those introductory phrases we talked about, in my opinion, etc., with these linking phrases for reasons, because one reason is, and then backing it up with examples, for example, that really makes your opinion expression much more robust, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You sound more articulate, definitely more convincing, and you actually invite a deeper, more meaningful conversation because you've given people something specific to latch onto.
Yeah, you're demonstrating that your opinion isn't just some random gut feeling, but something you've actually thought through, even just a little bit.
And that's generally well received.
Okay, fantastic. So we now know how to state our opinion clearly and how to back it up with reasons and examples.
The core building blocks.
But conversations aren't usually just one person giving a mini speech, right? They often involve different ideas floating around, people responding to each other. The back and forth.
Exactly. So how do we handle those moments when we maybe don't fully agree with what someone else has said, or perhaps we want to add a different perspective, but without sounding, rude or confrontational?
Ah, yes. The delicate dance of agreeing and disagreeing politely.
Delicate dance. I like that.
And this is where culture really, really plays a significant role. It's not just about the words. It's about the social rules.
How so?
Well, in many English-speaking cultures, and the sources specifically noted the US and the UK, managing agreement and disagreement smoothly is a pretty important social skill.
Okay.
It's generally expected that people will have different opinions. That's normal, even healthy for discussion. But the way you express that difference really matters a lot.
So it's not just about being right or wrong. It's about maintaining rapport, maintaining respect, even when you disagree.
Precisely. Let's start with the easier side, though. Full agreement. What are some good natural-sounding phrases for showing you're completely on board with what someone just said? Yeah, how do you say yes, totally, without just saying yes, totally?
Yeah, right. When you genuinely agree, you want to make that clear and sometimes even reinforce their idea. The sources gave some good options. I completely agree with you.
Simple, direct. Can't misinterpret that?
Nope. Leaves no doubt. Very clear signal of alignment. Or how about, that's a really good point.
Ooh, I like that one. It does more than just agree, right?
Exactly. It actually praises the other person's contribution. It shows you not only agree, but you also value what they said. You found it insightful. Great for building a positive interaction.
Yeah, makes the other person feel good.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then there's, I see what you mean.
I see what you mean. Does that always mean agreement? I sometimes use it just to show I understand their logic, even if I don't fully agree.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah.
Its primary meaning is understanding. Okay, I follow your reasoning. However, in the context of responding to a point you do agree with, it strongly implies agreement. It's perhaps a bit softer, less direct than I agree, but often used that way.
Okay, context is key there.
Context is key. Another simple, common one, especially informal, I think so too.
Yeah, use that all the time. Great for casual chat.
Perfect for that. And maybe a couple of stronger ones. You're absolutely right, or just exactly.
Ah, yes. Exact. Feels very emphatic.
It is. It strongly affirms the other person's statement. Exactly.
Yeah.
Is basically a concise way of saying, yes, I completely agree with the precise point you just made.
Okay, so plenty of ways to show you're listening and totally aligned. But let's be honest, real conversations often have more shades of gray, don't they?
Often, yes.
What if you mostly agree? Or you agree with, say, one part of what they said, but you want to add your own condition or maybe steer it in a slightly different direction? This is where that partial agreement comes in.
And partial agreement is incredibly valuable for navigating complex discussions. Super useful skill.
Why so valuable?
Because it allows you to validate what the other person's said.
Ah.
Show them you heard them and respect their point while still introducing your own viewpoint or nuance.
Okay, so it's respectful.
Very. It shows you've listened actively, you've processed their idea, but you have something to add or perhaps modify slightly. The sources give us some great structures for doing this gracefully.
Let's hear them. How do you agree? But.
Okay, a classic structure is, I see your point, but.
Right. Acknowledge, then pivot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You explicitly acknowledge you understand their perspective. I see your point. That builds connection, shows respect. Then the but clearly signals that you're about to introduce a contrasting idea or maybe a limiting factor. It prepares the listener for your slight divergence without just dismissing their initial statement flat out.
Okay, I see your point, bud.
What's another one?
Similar vibe. That's true, but I also think that.
That's true, but. So again, validation first.
Yep. You validate the truth or the validity of their statement. That's true, showing you accept their point as reasonable or factual, at least in part. But again, the but smoothly transitions to your own additional perspective or counterpoint.
Okay. And one more.
How about, I agree to some extent, but, explicitly stating the degree of agreement.
Exactly. This phrase, Clearly says your agreement isn't total. It's not 100%. You agree partially or up to a point. It's a very polite, quite gentle way to introduce a different view or a condition that limits your agreement.
Right.
Often feels softer than a direct disagreement.
Right. The source used that fast food example to illustrate this, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It was a good one. If someone states quite strongly, fast food is terrible for your health, how could you use partial agreement there?
Okay, so maybe I don't want to say, no, it's not. But I also don't think it's always terrible.
Right. So you can respond with something like, I see your point, but I think it's probably fine if you only eat it in moderation.
Okay, let's break that down. I see your point.
Mhm.
That's the validation. You're not denying that fast food can be bad for health.
Correct. You acknowledge the validity of their concern about the health aspect.
But there's the pivot. I think it's fine if you eat it in moderation.
Mm.
And there's the different angle, the condition moderation.
Exactly. You're agreeing implicitly that eating loads of fast food all the time is bad, but you're adding this crucial nuance that the frequency or the amount really matters. It transforms a simple, yes, it's awful, or no, it's fine, into a more balanced view about consumption habits.
That makes perfect sense. It avoids a head-on collision of opinions. It's much more like saying, okay, I get your concern about the general health impact, and I want us to also consider this other factor moderation, which changes the picture.
Precisely. It feels much more collaborative, less combative, trying to find common ground or add complexity rather than just opposing.
Partial agreement, definitely a key skill for sounding diplomatic and thoughtful, especially when the topic isn't just black and white, which, let's face it, most interesting topics aren't.
Very true. Okay, so that covers agreeing fully and agreeing partly. Now, the potentially trickier one, polite disagreement.
Right, when you genuinely just don't agree at all, or you think the other person's point is maybe flawed or misses something important. This is often the hardest part, isn't it? Especially if maybe your own native language or culture handles disagreement very differently.
It absolutely can be. You want to clearly state that you have a different view, but you need to avoid sounding aggressive or dismissive. Or worse, making it sound like you think the other person is stupid or just plain wrong.
Yeah, telling someone you're wrong in English conversation usually doesn't go over well.
Almost never. It's typically perceived as very blunt, maybe even rude in most standard contexts. So the source material highlighted some excellent, much softer approaches.
Okay, what are they? How do we disagree without being disagreeable?
The core strategy is often to focus on stating your differing perspective rather than directly attacking theirs. Make it about your view, not their error.
Okay, that sounds smart. Give me some phrases.
All right, a very common and gentle one. I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'm not sure. That sounds quite indirect.
It is. It's very gentle. You're framing the disagreement as your own uncertainty about their statement. I'm not sure I agree, rather than flatly stating their statement is incorrect or that you disagree definitively.
So it leaves room. Maybe you just need more convincing, or maybe you misunderstood.
Exactly. That softens the disagreement considerably. Another good one. I see things a little differently.
Framing it as perspective again.
Right. Like we mentioned from my point of view, this phrase frames the disagreement as simply a difference in perspective. Imagine two people looking at the same sculpture from opposite sides. They see different things, right?
Yeah.
Neither person is necessarily wrong. They just have a different view based on where they're standing. This phrase politely says, my opinion, my perspective, it's different from yours.
Okay, I see things a little differently. I like that. It feels non-confrontational.
Very much so. And maybe one more that's slightly more direct but still polite. Actually, I have a different opinion on that.
Okay, actually. Using actually there is interesting.
Yeah, actually, here often serves to slightly soften the disagreement, or perhaps just to gently signal that you're about to offer something contrary to what was just expected or said. The core part, I have a different opinion, is explicit, but the framing keeps it polite.
I'm noticing a pattern here. All these phrases seem to shift the focus onto your view, or your uncertainty, or your perspective,
Precisely.
rather than making a direct judgment or criticism of the other person's statement.
That is the absolute core strategy behind polite disagreement in English, particularly in, say, British or American contexts. It's about respecting the other person's right to hold their view, while clearly and confidently asserting that your own view happens to be different.
And then, presumably after using one of these phrases, you don't just stop there.
Well, definitely not. That would be weird. You would then typically follow up immediately with your actual opinion and the reasons for it, using those structures we talked about earlier.
Okay, so loop it back.
Yeah, for example, I see things a little differently. Pause. From my point of view, the main challenge isn't really the timeline, it's actually the overall cost involved. That's because,
Then you explain your reasoning about the cost.
got it. So state the difference in perspective gently, then immediately provide your alternative view and start backing it up.
Exactly. You disagree politely, then you explain constructively.
This is all incredibly practical.
Yeah.
Seriously, mastering these nuances for agreeing, partially agreeing, and disagreeing politely really allows you to participate fully and effectively in conversations without that constant fear of accidentally causing offense or sounding too harsh.
It really is. It's about being able to express yourself honestly and authentically while also skillfully navigating the social dynamics of communication. It's a balance.
Oh, this is great. Now, maybe let's broaden our view just a little bit and think about the context for all of this. The source material we looked at, it did discuss how expressing opinions is, well, quite common and even expected in many English-speaking cultures, specifically mentioning the US and the UK. Yes, and this is a really key cultural point that learners need to grasp. It's not just about language, it's about cultural norms.
Right.
Unlike some cultures where expressing a strong personal opinion, especially one that might differ from others in the group, might be less common or perhaps done very, very indirectly. In places like the US and the UK, having and voicing opinions is generally seen as a normal, expected part of conversation. And that applies across many settings: casual chats, classroom discussions, work meetings, even dinner table conversations.
So it's not seen as pushy or argumentative necessarily.
Not necessarily at all.
Yeah.
It's often interpreted as a sign of engagement, of interest, of critical thinking. Staying silent when asked your opinion might sometimes be seen as disinterested or unprepared, depending on the context, of course.
That's a really important distinction for learners aiming to interact effectively in those cultures. Understanding this underlying expectation is almost as important as learning the actual phrases themselves.
I completely agree. It helps you understand why these phrases are needed and when to use them. And, crucially, it means that disagreeing isn't inherently rude, provided you do it politely, using the kinds of strategies and phrases we've just been discussing.
Right. The politeness markers are key.
Absolutely. There's often a value placed on open discussion, even debate, where different viewpoints are aired, compared, and considered. The approach is frequently quite direct compared to some other cultures, but it's usually softened by politeness markers and, importantly, by providing reasons for your stance.
So, for instance, in a US or UK work meeting, saying something like, I disagree with that approach and here's why, that would be considered pretty standard.
Generally, yes,
Right.
especially if delivered calmly and respectfully. The crucial part there is the "and here's why." It immediately signals that your disagreement isn't just negativity. It's based on reasoning, and you're about to share it. It makes the disagreement about the ideas, about the evidence, not a personal attack.
That's a really useful way to frame it in your mind. Disagreement isn't just a rejection, it's an invitation to discuss the supporting reasons or evidence.
Well put, yeah. And this contrasts quite significantly with cultural contexts where perhaps maintaining group harmony or avoiding loss of face for others is the absolute top priority.
Right.
As the source material noted, in some contexts, people might employ very different strategies to signal a differing view. For example, they might start by saying something like, "That's an interesting idea."
Ah, the classic non-committal positive.
Exactly. It acknowledges the other person's contribution positively, validates it in a way, but without explicitly agreeing or disagreeing.
And what does that achieve?
It buys time, maintains a pleasant atmosphere, and then gives them the space to introduce their own different perspective very gently, perhaps framing it as just an alternative possibility, maybe we could also consider,
Yeah,
rather than a direct contradiction or correction.
that's an interesting idea. It feels very diplomatic, very smooth. It really highlights how the same underlying goal, needing to introduce a different viewpoint, can be achieved using vastly different linguistic and cultural tactics.
Precisely. And these cultural differences really underline why simply translating phrases directly from one language to another often doesn't work effectively. You need to understand the cultural purpose and the social implications behind the language choices.
Which becomes even more critical when you move into professional settings, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. In a business meeting or a collaborative project, the stakes can feel higher. You need to be able to contribute your ideas, voice potential concerns or disagreements, but you absolutely have to maintain good working relationships with your colleagues.
Right, you can't afford to alienate people you need to work with tomorrow.
Exactly. And the source material really emphasized this point. In professional environments, particularly in team settings where collaboration is key, the language used to express opinions, and especially disagreements, tends to become even softer, more indirect, and heavily focused on collaboration rather than confrontation.
Okay, so if you're wrong is bad in general conversation, it's probably career suicide in a team meeting.
Pretty much.
Instead of saying your idea is bad, or even the more polite but still direct, I disagree with your idea, what would be a more preferred professional way to handle that?
Well, the source gave an excellent example. Instead of any kind of direct confrontation like you're wrong, or even a blunt, I disagree,
Yeah.
a savvy professional might opt for something much more collaborative, like, let's look at this from a different angle.
Ah, let's look at this from a different angle. I love
Yeah.
that. Let's break it down. Let's inclusive, team focused.
Yes.
Look at this focuses on the issue, not the person.
Hmm.
From a different angle.
Yeah.
Completely non-judgmental about the current angle just suggests exploring alternatives.
Exactly. It frames the introduction of a potentially opposing idea, not as a rejection, but simply as considering another possibility together. It's inviting the group to broaden the perspective collaboratively.
That's brilliant. Very constructive.
It is. And this type of collaborative language was highlighted as really promoting productivity and mutual respect in the workplace. When people feel their ideas are heard, considered, and perhaps gently built upon, or alternative angles are explored together rather than just being shot down,
Yeah.
they're much more likely to contribute freely, feel valued, and work effectively as a team.
Makes total sense. Are there other phrases like that?
Sure. Other examples might include things like, I have a slight concern about, instead of bluntly saying, that won't work because, or framing a potential problem as a question. How would that approach address the issue of X, rather than stating that approach doesn't address X?
So, raising concerns gently or using questioning to prompt further thought rather than making declarative negative statements.
Precisely. It's like, as you said earlier, steering the ship gently in a different direction, rather than slamming on the brakes and yelling wrong way.
Got it. So, understanding these cultural layers, the general expectation to have opinions, the real value placed on providing reasons, and then the different strategies for handling agreement and disagreement across different contexts, especially professional ones, that seems just as vital as knowing the specific vocabulary phrases.
It really is. It's what allows you to use the language not just correctly according to grammar rules, but effectively and appropriately according to social and cultural rules in various real-life situations.
This has been incredibly useful. We've covered the building blocks, the phrases for stating, reasoning, agreeing, disagreeing, and also the crucial surrounding context of culture and situation.
Hopefully providing a solid foundation.
Definitely. Now, theory is great, but practice is where it sticks. So it's your turn, listeners. The source materials suggested a really great, simple way to start practicing these skills right away.
Yes, absolutely. The best way, maybe the only way, to really master these techniques and make them feel natural is to actively use them. So, here's a challenge. It's straightforward, and you can do it right now or later today.
Okay, what's step one?
Step 1. Just pick a simple question that requires you to give an opinion. The source suggested using, do you think smartphones are good or bad?
Okay, that's a perfect starting point. Pretty much everyone has thoughts on that, and there are definitely arguments on both sides.
Exactly. Or, pick something else you genuinely have an opinion on. Maybe a movie you saw recently, a local issue in your town, a new piece of technology you've tried. Anything works.
Got it. Pick a topic, frame it as a question needing an opinion. Step 2.
Step 2. State your opinion clearly using one of those introductory phrases we discussed earlier. Choose one. In my opinion, I personally believe. From my point of view, I would say that. Or, as far as I'm concerned. Pick the one that feels most appropriate for how you want to present your particular view on that topic.
Okay, opener chosen. Then step 3.
Step 3. Provide at least one reason to support your opinion. And ideally, add a specific example to illustrate that reason. Make sure to use those linking phrases we talked about, like because. The reason for this is, one reason is, or, of course, for example.
Okay, intro phrase, opinion, linking phrase, reason, maybe an example. Let's quickly try that smartphone example ourselves, just putting it all together. Suppose my opinion is generally positive that smartphones are good.
Okay, give it a go.
All right. From my point of view, smartphones are fundamentally good tools. Okay, that's the opener and opinion. One reason for this is their incredible ability to connect people instantly, no matter the distance. There's the reason. For example, I can video call my family who live on the other side of the world pretty much whenever I want, which just wasn't easily possible years ago. And the example. How's that?
Excellent. That's perfect. You used a perspective-based opener, from my point of view. You introduced a key reason clearly. One reason for this is connect people. And then you provided a really vivid personal example, video call family, to back it all up. Nailed it.
Cool. Now let's try the opposite opinion, just to show it works both ways. Maybe you think smartphones have downsides.
Okay, let me try that. Maybe using I would say for a slightly softer opening.
Go for it.
I would say that smartphones have actually introduced some significant problems into our daily lives. Okay, opinion stated. That's because they can be incredibly distracting and make it really hard to focus on tasks for extended periods. There's the reason. For example, I often find myself almost compulsively checking notifications, which completely breaks my concentration when I'm trying to read a report for work or even just relax with a book.
Cool.
And the example.
Perfect again. Same question, opposite stance, but structured exactly the same effective way. Clearly stated opinion using a suitable opener, supported by a clear reason introduced by "that's because," and illustrated with a relatable personal example. It works beautifully.
It does. It's a solid structure.
So the challenge for you listening is, give it a try yourself. Pick a topic you actually care about, something you have thoughts on, and practice saying your opinion out loud using this structure. Or maybe even write it down first, if that helps.
Writing can help organize thoughts initially.
And hey, we'd actually love to hear what topic you chose. Maybe think about what subject you enjoy discussing in English and perhaps try formulating your opinion on it using some of these techniques.
Yeah, practice truly is the key. The more you use these phrases, the more natural they'll feel and the more readily available they'll be when you need them in a real, spontaneous conversation. Don't be afraid to experiment and find the phrases that feel most comfortable for you.
Absolutely. And just so you know what's on the horizon, based on the material we've been reviewing for these deep dives, our next session is going to tackle another incredibly practical and often requested area for English learners.
Oh,
Identifying and, more importantly, fixing some of those really common grammar mistakes that can trip people up.
yes. That'll definitely be a useful deep dive. Should help everyone polish their communication even further.
Looking forward to that one. So, okay, to wrap up this deep dive on opinions. Expressing yourself effectively in English really is more than just knowing the words "I think."
Much more. It's about strategically using specific phrases to clearly signal your viewpoint.
It's about providing clear reasons and ideally vivid examples to support your ideas and make them convincing.
And it's about skillfully navigating agreement and disagreement, whether full, partial, or complete disagreement, in a way that is polite, respectful, and appropriate for the situation, always keeping that cultural context in mind.
So the advice is, use the phrases we've explored today. Start noticing how native speakers around you or in media you consume express their opinions. Pay attention to the language they use.
Great point. Listen actively for these structures. The more you consciously practice structuring your own thoughts this way, the more automatic, natural, and confident you'll become over time.
And maybe one final thought to leave you with. Think about how the way someone expresses their opinion actually makes you feel about their idea and maybe even about them as a person.
The delivery matters as much as the content.
Often, yes. It's frequently not just what people say, but how they say it, how they structure it, the politeness they use, the reasons they give that truly impacts whether you're persuaded or whether you feel respected in the conversation. So, as you practice expressing your own opinions, consider not just achieving clarity, but also the connection and the rapport you're building with your listener through your language choices.
That's a wonderful point. Communication is connection. Keep exploring, keep talking, keep practicing, and really try to enjoy the journey of becoming a more confident and expressive English speaker.
Couldn't agree more.
Until
The next deep dive.